Mounting pressure on China, Vice President Mike Pence headed to Singapore to talk trade with the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations. Speaking with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Tokyo yesterday, the vice president took a strong stance on China ahead of the president's meeting with President Xi at the end of the month.
The United States seeks a relationship with China that's based on fairness, reciprocity, and respect for sovereignty. The difficulties that the United States and other nations face with China have been well documented by our administration, and China knows where we stand. Nevertheless, President Trump is looking forward to his meeting with President Xi in Argentina. He believes that progress could be made, but either way, we're confident that the United States remains in a strong position.
Joining me right now to talk more about that is Fox News strategic senior analyst, General Jack Keane. General, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, good to see you, Maria.
And you were just in Singapore a few months ago, meeting with leadership there. Your take on the vice president's comments and how Singapore and the U.S. can team up here?
Well, yes, they're very concerned. I just came back from Vietnam this weekend also. They're very concerned about what China has been doing in the region for years and largely getting away with it, you know, because the United States had never truly engaged competitively against China. And they think that we have a long way to make up for it. But they truly appreciate the fact that the United States is back in the game, so to speak. And they're pushing back on China's economic and political warfare and also their militarization of particularly the South China Sea. And I think Vice President Pence's seminal speech a few weeks ago on China caught everybody's attention in the Indo-Pacific. And that was a huge step forward for the United States, but most importantly for our relationship with our allies. So I think Vice President Pence will be very welcome by the ASEAN leaders, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and I think he'll get positive feedback for the fact that President Trump is once again exercising American leadership in the region.
General, the president really has to walk a balance here because while pushing back on China, trying to get them to change their behavior, it also could impact business. And we've got the CEO of Boeing coming in here this morning to talk about his business. In the coming year and years, 1 in 4 or 5 planes made at Boeing will go to China. This is the second largest market for Boeing, and that's just the aerospace maker. I mean, there are tons of other companies as well looking to China for opportunities. So how does the president walk that balance?
Well, I think there has to be a balance. Listen, clearly, China is a major market, and American businesses will continue to do work there, to be sure. But I think what the president has done and illuminated the issue, trying to find a balance and stop stealing our intellectual property. Stop. If you have to do business in China, as you well know, Marie, you got to enter into a joint venture with them. Yeah. That's not the way we do business in Europe or in the Middle East. And as a result of that joint venture, they get access to our intellectual property. That's got to stop.
Yeah, it's true.
I think if we continue to do business, that's fine. But let's get it on a balance table where it's much more equitable and it's kind of the way we do business in other parts of the world. I will tell you this, a lot of the supply chain that exists in China from American business and other business are looking to go elsewhere. And in Vietnam that I just came back from, they are reaping some of the benefits of that, as will other nations in the region.
Yeah, I mean, I guess business has been dealing with, you know, succumbing to China and handing over their technology and going by their rules for so long that they forgot how unfair it was. Look, the other major point in the vice president's statement yesterday was on North Korea. Watch this. Got to get your reaction.
The president has made it clear that the time for implementing the agreement is not a driving factor. And as I assured you, Mr. Prime Minister, the pressure campaign will continue. The sanctions will remain in full force until we achieve the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea.
New satellite images reportedly show that North Korea is moving ahead with its nuclear program after Kim Jong-un's agreement with President Trump. So your take on these developments, General, what now?
Well, first of all, the vice president's visit to Japan and talking to Prime Minister Abe, I'll tell you what, he got an earful from him because that's the person that President Trump talks to any other world leader, and he truly gives him very good perspective on what's going on in North Korea and China. Listen, the North Koreans, in principle, have agreed to denuclearize. In fact, They have not taken a single step to do that. What we wanted out of the box was, one, give us an inventory of all of your sites and your weapons themselves. Two, give us a plan to destroy and disarm ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. That has not happened. And what we have to stay focused on is the third thing. There's not been a single ballistic missile or nuclear weapon that has been disarmed or destroyed. So while there's progress on the fringes and there's a lot of positive statements, the reality is, in terms of what needs to be done, there hasn't been any substantive progress.
And for the U.S., what does that mean? Should the U.S. be doing something different in terms of our strategy to get the denuclearization back on track?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly that's something that the national security team in this administration is working on. I would suggest, one, we got to get tough on China because they've opened the aperture on the sanctions, and some of that backdoor is happening. The Russians have always backdoored North Korea. We're not going to make any progress with them. The State Department has to make certain that the other nations are not giving up, because there's no missiles flying. There's no tests being taken. There's no sense of a crisis. So we have to make sure the other countries are enforcing the sanctions. And we've got to up our game ourselves. And we can do that militarily. Start moving some things into the region. Make sure that they know that we're dead serious. It's either you give us the weapons, Mr. Chairman, of North Korea, or we're going to come take the weapons. That's the deal that's on the table.
Let me ask you about oil in that vein. President Trump took aim at Saudi Arabia yesterday after reports that the country plans to cut oil production. The president tweeted this yesterday: hopefully Saudi Arabia and OPEC will not be cutting oil production. Oil prices should be much lower based on supply. Look, we know, General, that the U.S. has become one of the leading producers at this point, and now with the Saudis and OPEC wanting to cut production, they're trying to boost prices because it's in a bear market right now, 20% lower from the highs.
Yeah, well, there's consensus. The last OPEC meeting, even the so-called Russian cartel, you know, they felt there was going to be a cutback, obviously, in Iranian crude on the market, and as a result of that, the Russian cartel increased prices. But there's consensus developing now that there's going to be an oversupply in 2019. I suspect the Saudis have made a decision to cut. I think OPEC will cut next month in Vienna, and the Russians will likely follow suit. That's the path that we're on. I don't think there's anything that's going to change it.